Economic Studies and Planning at the JNU, and an absolutely front-ranking economist in the country, to come and give his presentation. I would request all the discussants to limit themselves to about 10 minutes each.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must also thank Minister Karim and the organizers of this conference for having invited me here and allowing me to participate. Besides the fact that it's been a learning experience, it is a privilege to be among those celebrating the kind of success that Kerala has seen in terms of turning around and restructuring its public enterprises. And we've had a very comprehensive presentation just now of the kind of processes and the outcomes that this restructuring has involved. What I plan to do in these 10 minutes is to put on my discussant's hat and raise a couple of questions which come to me as an outsider trying to look at and understand this experience. And the question, in fact, comes because of a feeling that there is a tension in the argument that we've been sort of elaborating over time and, of course, over yesterday and today. And that tension really lies in trying to understand why we need restructuring in different contexts, and of course in Kerala, and what exactly is the way in which we assess the success of that restructuring. The reason I think these questions constitute a source of tension is because of, right from the beginning, including Professor Patnaik's address yesterday, one question is why does the public sector emerge? Why, in fact, do states and societies choose to, in some sense, allow governments to enter into the process of production or the provision of services? And forgetting questions related to issues of ideology, to issues of a systemic nature, one reason is why we have always had the need for a public sector is, of course, the fact that there exists at different points of time in the development history of societies and economies an inability of the private sector to deliver in certain areas which are crucial from the point of view of accelerating the growth of per capita income. So, for example, if you take the obvious case of an area like infrastructure, we know that because of the sort of lumpy investments, the long gestation lags, the high risks, the low returns which are involved, for long periods of time in the early development experience of almost all countries, you actually would not find a private sector willing to come in and invest in these areas because of these factors, including the low returns, that therefore the state needs to come in because the existence of infrastructure is a prerequisite for the industrialization process. This is also true not merely of infrastructure. There could be, as part of some kind of a macroeconomic framework which governments adopt for pushing development, the need to establish, as for example in India, the Mahalanobis model thought it was extremely important for India to invest in the capital goods sector in order to be able to overcome the capital goods constraint, the inadequacy of capital stock to employ the labor force in full. And therefore, you wanted to push this area, rightly or wrongly, and since the private sector, for very similar reasons, was unwilling to make large investments in these capital-intensive sectors, the role was taken upon by the state in substantial measure to generate these industries which will generate the capital stock to overcome this constraint. And finally, of course, there are other reasons, and I think one I would like to emphasize that one of the roles public sectors play is that of being a standard setter for labor market conditions. That in some sense we know that one of the ways in which accumulation occurs within the private sector, particularly in early stages of development, is to go in for forms of accumulation which are based on extraction of surpluses in very intensive fashion, and that obviously sets up a sort of a contested terrain which can get very conflictual between labor and capital. And in order to be able not merely to mediate the relationship between labor and capital, but to set standards for what the labor market condition should be, of where the private sector should aspire to go to, the public sector has played an important role, which very often has been sort of wrongly titled overmanning, patriarchal, benefit provision, and so on and so forth. Now, if we take all of this into account, plus add on the fact that if these are the reasons why the public sector in part comes into existence, and there are many other reasons of similar nature, then we are also saying that the pricing requirements in the public sector are very different. In most cases, or in many cases, the public sector will not price on a cost-plus basis, taking into account what the market would bear. There would be completely different set of criteria to determine where prices should be set. For example, the most obvious case, you would not price a monopoly in the area of petroleum and POL would not try, or an oligopoly, which is largely public, will not try and price based on what the market would bear, because obviously that would push up transport costs. This is a universal intermediate. You can trigger inflation, and always administered pricing in all societies has played an extremely important role. Now, what are we suggesting when we look at that kind of character of pricing, which might even apply to steel structurals of certain kinds, which you think is important for industrialization or cement or whatever it may be? And that is that pricing, as far as the public sector is concerned, a public sector price is one instrument in the larger tax cum subsidy regime of the state. That is, you're not actually pricing as a cost-plus price based on what the market would bear in order to be able to deliver profits. You're actually pricing given the objectives of the enterprise concerned, the area concerned, and this price is part of a larger tax cum subsidy regime. Now, if we put all of this into account, then what we're really saying, which a number of people have said, is that profitability is no criterion of public sector success or of the success of public sector restructuring. If at all profitability is an indicator, then it's a different kind of profitability. It's a profitability in which we are calculating normative profits. We are not pricing as the market would price all our costs and benefits. We'll try and value social benefits which come out of projects as we do in social cost benefit analysis. And if after all of that we get a positive return, that can be taken as an indicator. We're using shadow prices of some kind or the other. But to take the bottom line as it appears in normal accounting standards with market prices as they prevail cannot be an index given what the public sector is being created for. Then why exactly are we actually speaking of restructuring? Because after all, it appears that restructuring comes into existence because of the fact that public sector is not doing well. It's not generating profits. It's a burden on the exchequer and so on. Well, restructuring comes partly because of the fact that you might find that for example, there could be errors in decision-making, technology choice, location. There could be overlapping jurisdictions where you have a government which is both the policy decision-maker with regard to policy, which is the decision-maker with regard to investment, which is the decision-maker with regard to prices, and which intervenes in a very detailed way in the operational functioning of enterprises. And these kinds of overlapping jurisdictions can set up conflicts of interest, which obviously lead to poor functioning. And of course, you can have a situation in which you feel that if you look at it in terms of purely technical efficiency parameters, certain enterprises are not doing as well, or because of exogenous factors, utilization has fallen, so you need to retool and re-strategize the enterprise in order to be able to overcome the exogenous constraints and improve utilization and so on. So there could be a whole host of other reasons. Now, and therefore, what we're saying is that once you look at that, we understand why institutional change constitutes the essence of restructuring. Corporatization, MOUs in which you set targets but give a certain degree of flexibility, even with regard to investment decision-making. You could have scaling, where you have different kinds of enterprises provided alternative kind of, the Ratnas and the Navaratnas and the Maharatnas and so on and so forth. So you basically are looking at institutional changes which allow you, including the strategic tie-ups, for example, which was just discussed, to be able to, in some sense, overcome certain constraints, which, looking at non-profit parameters, suggests that the public sector requires restructuring. Now, the question I want to raise is that can we, in some sense, then think of a set of parameters which go beyond the profit criterion, which of course were mentioned, and privilege those parameters in assessing restructuring? Now, the reason is, I think, the reason we should do that is because state governments in particular, and I want to conclude with this, state governments in particular face a substantial constraint. If we say that the public sector is not there necessarily to make profit because there are other objectives it's supposed to fulfill, If we say pricing in the public sector cannot be the way pricing for commercial enterprises is, then we're obviously saying that we are using public sector prices as part of a larger tax cum subsidy regime, which means that I must be able to mobilize resources elsewhere to deal with any shortfalls which might characterize public sector units. Now, we know that because of a whole set of factors, including the way in which the sharing of national revenues occurs in the Indian context, most state governments are cash trapped. So you'd end up with a situation where you'd say that, listen, if you get into this trajectory, we're actually going to end up in a context in which you're not going to have the money to be able to provide these enterprises. These enterprises, therefore, would be making losses, and if they are making losses at some point of time, we'll be faced with closure. But this, I think, is a challenge we have to face. That is, public sector enterprises restructuring cannot be looking at only those individual enterprises and what they need. It also needs to look at this larger environment and how we can generate the resources to be able to sustain public enterprises the way they should be sustained. Because otherwise, we'd end up in a situation in which we say that restructuring is successful because public sector enterprises are making profit. Public sector enterprises are making profit because they're behaving like private sector enterprises, and in which case, beyond a point, I don't know whether it is a celebration of the public sector per se and the role it plays, or merely the fact that we can think of ingenious ways of re-engineering units in order to be able to make them behave like and be as successful as the private sector is in different contexts, which I don't think is the objective of all of those who have gathered here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chandrasekhar. The next speaker is Sri A.K. Padmanabhan, who is originally from Kerala, is a trade unionist, currently president of the Center for Indian Trade Unions at the national level. He started his career as an employee of a private company. His trade union activities extend to more than 3.5 decades. And of course, as I said, he's currently the president of CITU, Sri Padmanabhan.
Respected Chairman of the session, our other distinguished participants, and others who have participated for this from yesterday onwards, listening to the great achievements, I will mark it like that, of the Kerala government and the Kerala public enterprises. And I also share the pleasant experiences which has been shared, those who spoke here and those who have been listening to the proceedings all through the day yesterday and today. And the Kerala experience and the discussions which we had yesterday and the presentation made by Mr. Balakrishnan today have listed out the positive aspects of the resurgence of the public enterprises or the state-owned enterprises in Kerala, and also many other issues connected with that. The reconstruction of the state-owned enterprises, and sickness. Mr. Balakrishnan was referring to the establishments in a hospital, comparing it to a treatment stages. And how that resurgence or resurrection was possible has been aptly described by him. And we are all happy that this has happened at a time when many of our participants, national, international participants, yesterday said that this privatization cannot be a panacea for all the ills of the enterprises. In that way, many aspects of it has been explained. And even in this discussion, there are three more participants who have larger experience regarding the changes that has been made here at the national level, at the state level, from the administration, from the trade union angle also. I would only like to point out one portion, which I think will be the more fitting person to explain that part of it is Comrade Ravindranath, who has been dealing with that directly from the state. But as far as I have followed, and I have been closely following the developments here in Kerala regarding the public sector units, and one has been the approach of the trade unions and the approach towards the trade unions, and how that has been made possible in the present circumstances. Before I go to that, I was reminded by one of my colleagues today, when SICA was enacted, it was earlier the Sikh Industries Act. It was only for the private sector. When the public sector institutions were also referred to SICA and through that to BIFR and other things, it was Comrade Jyoti Basu, one of our founder leaders of CI2, and I need not say anything about him. Just by referring to his name, it is more than enough, I feel. He wrote to the government of India on many occasions, continuously, saying that why should it should revert to an agency to assess the impact and what should be done, why it should be done in such a way. It should be referred to a tripartite or a joint machinery where the representatives of the management, the trade unions, bankers and financial institutions, they will be the fittest person who can sit together, discuss and come to conclusion and implement. Yesterday, the BIFR former chairman was telling how it takes, and others also are aware, those who have dealt with BIFR cases, how we are not able to come to a timely conclusion. And that alone creates a situation where it can never be resurrected in that stage. And so it was Comrade Jyoti Basu who had said this again and again. But it was not listened to or accepted. The legal matters are different from the practical experience or political experience of it. But what has Kerala done? Actually, the government of Kerala has, during this period, accepted that suggestion. Mr. Balakrishnan was also telling about it. How they could sit together. How the trade unions, the bankers, officers, the management people, they could all sit together, discuss and come to conclusions how this can be revitalized and how the production and other process could go on continuously. And so this part of it, a democratic process where all, if you use the common word that is being utilized, all the stakeholders come together to have a proper discussion. And I think the success in Kerala was that the involvement of the workers and the trade unions, even before this government came to power, when the earlier government decided through formation of committees and other things that this privatization is the only way out and decided upon which of the factories it should be given to whom and all that, all workers could come together. All workers could be mobilized together. All trade union organizations, irrespective of political affiliations also, could come together. At that time, they could not finally take a decision, and then the election intervened. And after the election, as Mr. Balakrishnan was also telling, with a clear-cut statement to the people, what is the intention of this left formation if they come to power? What will be the attitude towards the industries? What will be their attitude towards the public sector units in the state? With that, after coming to power, after winning the election, They followed what was expected of them. And here also, the role played by the minister, yes, the policy decision has been taken by the government. And the minister who himself was a participant or was a leader of the struggle earlier against privatization, he being in charge of the industries ministry, that also has helped, along with the policy decision and involvement of the trade unions, and the guidance the minister also got from his organization, the trade union experience which he had, and the confidence with which all the trade unions, here again, it was irrespective of political affiliations and thinking. My information and my knowledge about it is that all the trade unions came together. They were able to sit together along with the officers, the management of the companies concerned, and they were able to sit together and decide upon what should be done. And this has really helped in dealing with the situation. And after the collective efforts that contributed to the revival, yes, here also, a sort of a confidence-building measures were required. The workers, there should be a confidence, could be created among the workers. Yes, we have to wait. We have to involve ourselves. We have to see that this company is revived and the production is restarted. That way, yes, that was the experience, that is with which I think the celebration which Mr. Balakrishnan referred to in a remote area, whole village or whole area coming together to celebrate the reopening of the public sector enterprise. That is the democratic part of it. And workers could be convinced that their demands will be settled. Yes, worker also, as far as I know, 4 years together, they did not get their wage increase. Even the regular payment of wages also was problem in certain stages. And that was also taken care of. They waited, they cooperated, they worked together, and with that came the result. And so this process of the involving workers, involving the trade unions, taking into confidence the role played by the workers and the participants, and that has played a major role. And this aspect of the revival, I think, is a lesson not only to the Kerala enterprises, Kerala state-owned enterprises, but to other areas also at the national level and where we are at the international level also. Here again, I would like to refer to what the minister has written in a pamphlet circulated to us, that workers' participation in the management. Yes, there have been some experience here in India. Not a satisfactory experience that way. Yes, there was one representative in the director board. Yes, public sector banks and some other institutions had an experience. And what was the experience? Yes, they were part of the board. Yes, can be they a worker representative or a worker director in the board. Not more than that. They were never part of the policy decisions. They were never consulted. They were never taken into confidence. But if a situation can be created where the worker representative also is able to contribute from his own experience. Yes, maybe they may not be academically qualified. They may not be a proper MBA or a BE or something like that as an engineer. But as a worker, the experience that he or she has got as a worker, that can contribute to the revival, that can contribute to the sustained operations of the establishment concerned. And if that way, with an equal footing, they are also involved. And I think that the beginning also should come from Kerala. In that also, within this, as quickly as possible, if that also is decided, and then shown to the whole world and showcased to the whole world that these are all the areas where regarding workers also we take into consideration on this. And the creation of a department or an institution, I don't know whether it is a department, it's part of the Industries Department, RIAB, part of Industries Department, a separate mechanism or an institution where actually it is, yes, a set of officials or experts or whatever we may call them, their target is to revive, to accelerate the process of revival and resurgence of these state-owned enterprises. That way, when this cannot be thought of at the national level. Yesterday also I said, and many of us know, how there was a department of disinvestment working. It was decided, yes, public sector has to go. Workers or trade unions or even left organizations in this country, they were not saying that everything should be nationalized, everything should come under public sector. It was never the situation. But the story or the history of the public sector, how it was formed, how it was necessary, yes, our chairman has contributed to that in a bigger way in various discourses or presentations that he has made. In that way, I think the institutions like RIAB, if they are also, it is also followed up at various level, that will be of great help. And in addition to that, the technological upgradations that are required and proper market studies. Yes, our Balakrishnan was referring to how the cement industry, because of the revival in the construction industry, it helped the cement industry. And also it helped KMML because of the increase in sales of the paint industry and all that. Yes, the proper market study, that is a major part of the revival of the institutions, and technological upgradations and the democratic involvement of workers, which I already said. All this will help us to showcase the achievements of Kerala to a national perspective and also to the international. Yesterday, many of the participants from other countries, they were also referring to the experience in their countries and other countries in the various regions, and also how this can be taken as a model or an initiative or the possibility of revival of the state-owned enterprises, even in this period of neoliberalization. And that too, another point which was referred to yesterday also and today also it was referred to, the limitations of a state government within the present-day system. And our Balakrishnan was also referring to that. Yes, there are financial limitations, and there are many other issues connected with that. The limited power of a state government. If within these limitations, if Kerala can do this, why not we do it at the national level, and why not we try to do it in bigger industries where we have got markets, we have got technological upgradations, where there are skilled workers, we have got a very good national, international market. Why all these institutions should be privatized? And this being an issue of bigger challenges before the people of India and before the working people of India, this should be taken up. And the experience, I'm sure, from these two-day deliberations will be of great help to carry forward our struggle against privatization. And that way, I am thankful to the organizers for giving me an opportunity to be here, be able to listen to various deliberations being made here. With these words, I conclude. Thank you.
And the degree of autonomy. That was one of the things we said yesterday. Now, what is the tension? The tension comes because though the public sector undertakings, whether as companies, whether as statutory or non-statutory corporations, or as even cooperative societies with considerable government control, was set up to permit greater flexibility compared to departmental undertakings or other government departments, what happened was that under Article 12 of the Constitution, which defines the state, it was left a little fuzzy where exactly the public sector undertaking stood. So it said that the state comprises the national government and the parliament, and the local government and the legislatures, and the other local authorities, and other authorities which may have considerable government control. So specifically, the public sector undertakings were not mentioned, but most of the judicial pronouncements which came in terms of the litigations, where there are many litigations which came up, between the public sector enterprise and the employees, the public sector enterprises and the contractors. And it was in these litigations that actually the proposal was made. A proposal was made, and this was referred by the law department or the law ministry to the, I think, the 13th Law Commission, which in its 155th report or 156th report studied this proposal, whether there should be a clause, underlying a clause in addition to Article 12, saying that Article 12 excludes public sector undertakings from the provision of the, from the ambit of the state. Now, this was examined by the Law Commission, and they in fact concluded that it was not at all necessary to do that, that even if one added such a clause, whatever the litigation that took place could still take place just as much for the public as for the private sector, and in fact, that there should be no attempt to free the public sector undertakings from the constitutional arrangement. So this was a very interesting piece of evidence which I found, and it's argued out very well also, and in fact, the Law Commission sort of wraps the public sector undertakings for unnecessary and trivial litigations which could easily be settled in very many different ways and were not at all necessary to go up to even the Supreme Court. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a place for autonomy, there is a place for good management practices, which need not be thought of as always being thwarted because the government interferes. See, that is the sort of tension which prevails, that in the public sector, the government interferes, and therefore, we are not able to perform in a manner that we would like to. Now, this is where I said that A, this has been completely demolished by the Law Commission, that there is no such thing, and the B is that if the public sector enterprise operates with the approach that it is supposed to take vis-a-vis the employees, vis-a-vis its customers, vis-a-vis its contractors, there is no reason why it should not be able to perform in the way it wants to perform. So this was one sort of a tension I wanted to talk about in depth, and wanted to talk about as the first point that I wanted to make, stating that in fact what the resurgence of the Kerala state-owned enterprises shows is that with the political will, with the support of the government, which is not interfering in so many ways in which the resurgence has taken place, whether it's in terms of professionalization of the board of directors, professionalization of the company board, professionalization of the managerial and the technical staff of the companies, and of course the fact that discussions took place with the workers' unions and arrangements made on how things can be made much better. There is every possibility that you can actually exert or you can express an extent of autonomy which is very much there available to the public sector enterprises. But as I said, that the message given was that, look, the government don't interfere in some of these things that we are wanting to do, and we will be able to perform. So it can be done. So this was the first thing I had wanted to state as my appreciation of the Resurgence package, that it did manage to exert quite a bit of autonomy by some of the things which were stated by Mr. Balakrishnan in his presentation. It's institutionalization of the recruitment of the managerial and the technical staff, and I think there is also some professionalization